Thanks for joining us with our next edition of OTR with Democratic Liberal House member Representative Jason Morgan from Ann Arbor. Our lead story, who will be the next governor candidate? On the OTR panel, Lauren Gibbons and Jonathan Osting. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thanks very much. Welcome to Studio C and another edition of Off the Record. You know what? I'm a little tired of the U.S. Senate race. I'm a little tired of control of the House. Let's do something completely different. Who's running for governor? Governor Gretchen Whitmer cannot run again, so who might run on the Democratic side? Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II, Oakland County Senator Mallory McMorrill, and Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson is very interested. On the Republican side, former candidates for governor Kevin Rinke and Perry Johnson.
I suspect both of them have a lot of money. They both expressed an interest in running before, and I suspect that both probably will run again.
From West Michigan, a new name on the list is Senator Eric Nesbitt, the Senate Minority Leader. His name is in play.
I think that Nesbitt would be a strong candidate as well. He'd have to raise the money.
Since Detroit is sometimes not held in high regard in outstate Michigan, the popular wisdom is a Detroit mayor would have tough sledding to get the governor's job. Mr. Mitchell thinks just the contrary about Mr. Duggan.
Mike Duggan has a great chance if he decides to take on Jocelyn Benson.
You might be asking at this point, why all this chatter about the next governor, which is 2 years down the road? Mr. Mitchell suggests you have to start now because that race will start the day after the next coming election for president.
You have to be really hitting the ground running, whether you announced or not, but you've got to be hitting the ground running the day after the 2024 election. These days, the amount of money that has to be raised is enormous.
If you would like to be sitting in that chair in 2 years and your name was not on this list, call collect. You like that one? Yeah, call collect. You can't find my number. So what do you make of this thing? Actually, this is going on.
Yeah. At the Mackinac Policy Conference, Jonathan and I actually did a story kind of about some of the gamesmanship that was happening behind the scenes. You saw a lot of those names at the conference.
By the way, let me interrupt. One name was left out. Who is it?
Well, none of the
Mark Hackel.
Mark Hackel, sure.
Yes. I apologize.
Hackel, yes. Every year around this time, he thinks about running.
Well, that's probably in my subconscious. I knew he'd never run and never get the nomination, so I left it out. But I interrupted. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay, and that was important to mention because he did make that little bit of news there. But yeah, so there was a lot of gamesmanship happening. A lot of those names were at the conference. They were making press conferences, speeches, trying to, shake hands and get their names out there. And I think you're right in the sense that this is something that kind of has to happen now. It is a deep bench, especially on the Democratic side. And if they want to, edge their way in and try to get an early lead, it's time to start having those conversations.
Yeah, Democrats have done a really good job in some of these high-profile, top-of-the-ticket elections in recent years and sort of clearing the field for a preferred candidate. Yeah. It doesn't seem like we're heading in that direction this year. There are so many, high-profile. I mean, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, the mayor of Detroit. These are big names who are all competing or seemingly competing. I mean, to Lauren's point on Mackinac, Mayor Duggan usually gives a very Detroit-specific speech. This year it was what the state could learn about some efforts in Detroit.
He had a vision.
Very different framing, of course. Lauren asked Secretary Benson if she was interested, and she said, well, I'll talk about that later, but I am interested in these things that have nothing to do with my job as Secretary of State, other policies outside of that role. So.
Of all of those people, she has to be the most careful because she's got to do a good job on this election. Okay, that will be her audition. If something goes wrong on this thing, she can kiss being governor goodbye, and I think she knows that. And so she's playing it very close to it. But look, she wants to be governor. Don't we agree on that?
I certainly think there's some interest there. She's made that pretty clear. But it's very at this point, yes, the election. She's got to get through the election. That was what she told me. She's like, I am focused on 2024 because if that doesn't work for whatever reason, or if it runs into some of those problems that we saw in 2020, that eats up a lot of time that she could be spending on other pursuits.
Let's also not forget that last time out, before Gretchen Whitmer ran, Mike Duggan was in the contest almost. Do you remember that? And she was not too happy about that he was sort of making noises.
Sure. Yeah, I think, Duggan has thought about this for a while. To Steve Mitchell's point there, look at, we're taping this on Friday. Last night, Mayor Duggan, front row for the grand opening of the Michigan Central Station, this huge symbol of Detroit's comeback. I mean, whether Detroit is popular with out-state folks, I think a lot of people see Mike Duggan as somebody who came in and helped turn around that ship. So I think he's got a pretty strong case if he does decide to run.
Especially if Joe Biden becomes president again.
Yeah, and they are close. I mean, Mayor Duggan has worked closely with Joe Biden. They are allies. Obviously Whitmer is as well, and Gilchrist therefore. But Mayor Duggan, I think, probably has a line to the president.
The Free Pass story earlier this week that Gilchrist might be looking at mayor of Detroit.
That's a possibility too, and I think that will be really interesting as well. If Mayor Duggan decides to vacate that, there are going to be so many names that we start looking at, like who might vie to take that place. That's a pretty, enviable position for a lot of these city council members, for these state reps in the Detroit area. That's a job that's very high profile, and as Jonathan mentioned, it's a good time to be mayor of Detroit. They had the draft, they have the Michigan Central opening. A lot of eyes are on Detroit nationally as just sort of a symbol of, look at this, like Detroit is making progress. So it's a very interesting position, and if Mayor Duggan decides to pursue higher office, there's going to be a lot of names in there.
We'll see how 2024 goes and what the political climate is heading into the gubernatorial election cycle. But I think it is notable that we're talking about this deep bench for Democrats, and Republicans don't have that right now. Some of the candidates you mentioned in the intro, Tim, Kevin Rinke, Perry Johnson, those folks have money. If they decide to run, they could fund a campaign, but they've also ran before and failed for various reasons.
Well, Johnson thinks he's got a good excuse. He was unschwoggled by some crooks.
Well, then what happened with his presidential election, Tim?
That was all about running for governor.
Sure. Well, I thought it was all about running for Senate, and then he didn't do that. So, Perry Johnson obviously wants to
do something.
For sure. I mean, Arik Nesbitt is an interesting name. He actually has a track record as an elected official. But it's a tougher proposition right now, I think, for Republicans to want to run, because you've got so many different currents running through that party right now. You need a pretty unique candidate who's going to be able to harness the power of the grassroots, the Trump coalition, the MAGA movement, but also appeal to some of the traditional donors that have funded successful Republican campaigns in the state. Democrats don't have those same issues right now. That's not to say the climate is going to favor Democrats, but in terms of the rosters right now, Republicans have a tougher job.
That is a tough needle to thread. It really is. How do you walk that line and appease the Trump people and also bring the moderates, what's left of the moderates in the party, into the fold?
I think there's a lot of people are watching to see if Mike Rogers can be successful with that. He has the establishment backing. He has the Trump endorsement. He is trying to walk that line. Will he be successful? I guess we'll see, in the primary, and then if he moves on to the general as well. But that's something that he is testing the waters on right now. And I think if he is successful in that endeavor, perhaps others will start thinking about it.
Mr. Mitchell made the point that we didn't have in that piece that the minority leader's position in the Senate was a launching pad for a guy by the name of John Engler, who did become governor. I think somebody in town might say, we know John Engler, and Arik Nesbitt is not John Engler.
Yeah, I mean, John Engler was a political force. Senator Nesbitt, of course, has risen the ranks in the Republican Party. He is the top-ranking Republican in the state legislature right now. We live in a different political climate where cutting deals across the aisle is not as popular as it once was. So the minority position doesn't have quite as much influence, you could argue, even though it only is a 2-seat minority. So. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly an interesting candidate. He's, I don't think super well known outside of Southwest Michigan, so he'd had a lot of work to do.
But he's got to raise the money. He's got to raise the money. Sure. And he also said, if I read the story correctly, that he has to check with his wife first. So stay tuned on that one. Let's go back to the Hackle thing for a second. We sort of laughed about this, but he does have a track record of talking about running for governor, but never pulling the trigger.
Yeah, that's true, and I think he's always been interested in it, but he has admitted that he may not be the Democrats' first choice because he has occasionally broken rank with the Democratic establishment on some pretty key issues. I mean,
not endorsing Joe Biden.
Like not endorsing Joe Biden. I think that
talk about breaking ranks.
Right. So some of his criticisms of the party could potentially hinder any gubernatorial aspirations.
Yeah, I talked to Hackle on the island, and he's well aware of those issues. I mean, his selling point to the broader electorate is that, as he puts it, I stand in the aisle. I don't cross the aisle.
Exactly.
I am standing in the aisle.
And he's right.
That said, it's tougher to get through a primary. It's tougher to get the backing of a political machine if you are not seen as a player in that, apparatus. Somebody who plays nice in that apparatus, you could say. So, while he might have an appeal in a general election, his challenge would be to get through a primary and actually be a nominee for the Democratic Party.
Well, in his case, wouldn't you think the more the merrier in a primary, a better chance a guy who is not right down the mainstream has? Everybody else divides up that side of the vote, and he can appeal to independents and the like. Yay, nay?
For sure.
I think that's true. And he also represents a really interesting constituency, Macomb County. It's a very populous county, always a swing county. So he kind of, has navigated the waters of a very swing district
that
or
dynamic,
county.
Tim, would be Rick Snyder in 2010. The seemingly political moderate in the field, who, because it was so fractured with bigger names, managed to put together a winning campaign
with 30% of the vote, which last time I checked was not a majority. All right, let's call in our guest today to talk about budget and other related issues. Representative. Representative, welcome to Off the Record. It's good to see you from Ann Arbor.
Yes,
How do you
thanks
like
so much, Tim.
East Lansing?
I come here when I need to.
And this is one of those occasions. Let's start with you're trying to reinvent the way that we spend money to attract jobs. Are you and the governor at odds?
I don't know that I wouldn't say that we are at odds.
Has she signed off on what you want to do?
Well, let me tell you this. One, let me tell you what we're putting forward. We are putting forward a truly comprehensive and holistic strategy for economic development, something that we've never seen before. It pulls together all of the critical elements that we've been talking about over the last couple of years: transit, housing, job creation and growth, reinvesting in communities, community revitalization. This is something that I really do feel is a comprehensive consensus approach to what we're looking at around economic development. I think this is something that ultimately everyone will get behind, and I think we're going to be really happy with it.
She has not signed off.
I will say this. I think that's a good question.
Why are you laughing?
I think that's a great question. I think that we've had a lot of conversations around economic development. I would argue that's probably the biggest issue that we've talked about in my time as a legislator. And I laugh because it's also very exciting. The work that we are doing around economic development isn't just about the old school traditional approach to economic development. We're trying to actually grow our state, grow our population, and chart a path that isn't just a 1 year or a 2 year plan. This is a 10-year plan. We want to make sure that we are creating a state that looks different than it looks today in a really positive way, that people actually want to move here, they want to invest, and they want to raise families here. So I think that's something that everybody will eventually and ultimately get behind. But at this point in the process, we're putting together this bold idea. We've put it out there. We're talking about it, and we're excited to see what people
If she
think.
says she doesn't want it, it's dead.
You know, I think that's a fine question. But I think that we've had, I think I've seen really good conversations around economic development here in Michigan. I think if you listen to what the Population Commission talked about, if you look at what the governor has talked about the last couple of years around job growth and creation of jobs, if you look at what we've talked about in the House and the things that we care about around transit and housing, I think you're seeing all of those ideas come together in this package that I would note has a wild amount of support.
Well, Representative Tim mentioned maybe the governor isn't completely on board with this yet, but at the same time, her SOAR program, this mega incentive deal that funds large-scale business incentives, is only funded for one more year, I believe. Right. She doesn't know if she'll have a Democratic legislature next year, so she wants to extend this program, I assume, before the year is done. So don't you have a negotiating position there? Would you be comfortable simply voting for more funding for SOAR for 5 more years? Would you do that?
I think that's a fine question. I think that...
would you do it?
I guess let me say this. I think this program has been a strategy for the last couple of years that has resulted in job growth and creation. What I would like to see long-term, though, is a broader, more comprehensive strategy. It seems clear to a lot of us that we will not grow our state without housing and transit and revitalizing our communities. So I think those have to be an important part of this. And I don't see this as an adversarial conversation to anyone. I really see it as a productive growth in the conversations that have been happening. Senator McMorrow, for example, testified in committee with me this week, right alongside me. We've had great conversations about the work that she has done in the Senate and that plan that was passed out of the Senate as a whole. This builds upon that work. That work itself built upon the work that the governor put forward to creating this program in the first place. So I think you're ultimately seeing a continuation of work as opposed to something brand new out of left field or anything like that. I think this is a really positive consensus approach that we could all get behind.
How do you get the business community on board with this? I think there's some that are concerned, and perhaps the governor as well, that including all of these additional requirements to invest in a lot of the things that you've mentioned, could steer people away from looking at Michigan and look to states with other states with less strings attached.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. That's actually a really exciting question because we have a lot of the business community on board with this idea. So that's something because they see, the business community sees that this is important to have a comprehensive, long-term, and holistic strategy for a lot of our businesses throughout our state. One of the number one challenges that their employees are facing is having enough housing and being able to get to work. So as we create these jobs, as we bring businesses here, we have to have somewhere for folks to live. They have to be able to get to work. They have to have really great communities that they can raise families in. So I think they're actually really receptive and open to this idea. And on our almost 100 list of cards that were submitted this week, we have folks from Traverse City to Southeast Michigan to Grand Rapids to the Upper Peninsula, all on board, business, labor, the environmental community. How often do you have something that has that broad of a coalition of support here in our state?
Representative, there's a subplot to this story, and it's emerging here clearly. Progressives in the Michigan House want to move in a different direction than the traditional legislative process run by governors, run by big businesses. Am I not correct?
I don't think you are, Tim, and I only say that because of this. So I've served in local government for 6 years before this as a county commissioner. I served as chair of our county commission. And the approach that I took coming in is the approach that I wish all government operated under. We were collaborative, we were inclusive, we listened to everybody's ideas, and then when we put forward ideas and proposals, They were the culmination of those conversations and those ideas. I know it's maybe a little idealistic, but I think that's how all government should work. We should have bipartisan conversations. We should have inclusive conversations that pull everyone to the table. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this proposal. It's not, what the House or Senate or governor want as these separate ideas. What we've put forward, we think, is kind of the ideal plan that is comprehensive and pulls all of those great ideas together in a really positive and constructive way.
But by the same token, there has been a rubbing of the nerves here in the House caucus between the progressives and the Speaker when it comes to the budget. Am I right on that one?
I think that's a good question. I think in any caucus, you're going to have differences in key priorities and ideas. I think I've been described as somewhat progressive. I represent Ann Arbor. But most folks don't realize I grew up in northern Michigan. My first boss was Congressman Bart Stupak in the Upper Peninsula. I've never necessarily described myself as just solidly progressive in that sense. What I've described myself always as is a pragmatic progressive.
But are you
progressive values, but I want to get things done at the end of the day and be constructive and work with everyone. That's the approach that a lot of us take.
And are you willing to say to the Speaker, I'm not going to vote for your budget until I get some of these things that I want to get done? Are you willing to say that?
I think it'd be too soon to say that, and I don't think that's ever anything that I would want to happen.
The chatter is out there, though, right?
Every member has different ideas, but I guess here's what I would say. I'm really focused on this package because I think it is that thing that can bring everyone together. And I think this is the package that is holistic, that brings together housing, transit, job creation. Seriously, all of the things that everybody has talked about wanting, all in one package. So that's where I'm really focused on this. I think some of the internal politics have actually been really positive as we've been working together on this package. And so it's a truly rare and exciting thing where you have, quote unquote, more progressive members as well as folks from all parts of the state. That doesn't happen very often. This is really exciting.
Does it make it more complicated, though, for this to be happening in an election year when it's such a close majority? You really need some of that buy-in. How are you threading that needle between, some of the progressive concerns about just, offering businesses taxpayer dollars versus, the needs of, the business community and want it? How do you balance those kind of opposite poles?
Yeah, well, I think this is. I truly don't want to sound too idealistic here, but I think this really is the piece that pulls all of those polls together. My hope is that the votes and the support for this will be as bipartisan as the huge coalition supporting it. That is my hope at the end of the day. So I may be a Democrat from Ann Arbor, but I care about our entire state. I care about the UP in rural Michigan, and that's why we've put things in this package that really help those areas connect people with jobs as well. So I think that you're going to see, hopefully, a lot of support. We have to do our job and earn the votes of every one of our colleagues, or at least a majority of our colleagues. But I think that we've really put something together that is that rare and unique unified approach.
There's another area where we saw a little bit of a stress point between so-called progressives and more traditional Democrats in the legislature last year was on personal financial disclosure, or ethics writ large. Ultimately, the governor and the speaker were not willing to sign, it seems, a more advanced or more aggressive form of ethical disclosure that you and some colleagues were pushing for. Is there any talk about going any further? There were promises at the time that we'll revisit this. And secondly, on that note, what about public records requests? What about FOIA? I'm old enough to remember when Democrats were in the minority and complained that Republicans were not doing these things. Democrats are in the majority now, and they're not doing these things. Where do those efforts stand?
That's a great question. As you know, I've always been a huge fan of transparency, ethics reform, better government, and all of these things, because I think it leads to better public policy at the end of the day that's more focused on people and what they need. I'd like to see all of these things happen that you mentioned, FOIA and stronger disclosure requirements and some of those things. There are still going to be a lot of things that we want to get done that we just don't have the time or the ability to get done before the end of the summer or the end of the year. I think you'll see a lot of conversations come back in the fall after the election. But frankly, I think we need more than one term with a Democratic trifecta to get a lot of these things done. I push hard every single day to have us pass the best policy that we can and to do as much as we can. But I have also learned that with 56 members and a 1-seat majority, you have to have everyone on board. And there's always some challenge to every single issue. It can be as simple as naming a road, it seems like, and you will have folks who will find some concern that we've got to address and work through.
So, well, to that point, though, the FOIA bills have passed the House unanimously the last several sessions. Like, what's stopping Democrats from doing it now?
So that I don't know. I'd be happy to see it. I'd love to vote on it, but I think that's a question that's probably above my head.
So what is more important, maintaining control of the House or moving on these issues which benefit the entire state of Michigan?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the answer is both. I think you maintain the majority by doing things that people want to see and that they like.
Have people in the caucus saying we can't have both if we're taking votes on controversial issues that could cost us votes back home. You've heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And you don't believe it.
Well, I think there are some issues that take a little bit more time to get the support for, but I think there are still a lot of things that we could do that would have broad public support and are not controversial.
You're going to be stuck doing this stuff in lame duck. Be honest.
I think a lot of things will hopefully happen in lame duck. As I said, my big priority is getting as much done as we can. I think that's how we maintain the majority. I think that's how we get people excited to turn out and vote. And I think we have 40 years of work to do. We've done a heck of a lot of it this last year and a half, but I still want to get more done as much as we can.
Stay tuned. Thank you for being on the program. Also, our thanks to our panel. See you more Off the Record right here next week.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.